This is for those who believe in the potential of science, making brave choices, choosing to push the boundaries. This is why we believe in what science can do.
Welcome. Just out of curiosity, anyone here from the Potomac area? Anyone here from the Walt Whitman district of schools? Okay, great. It's good to see. I'm going to be talking about the power of the immune system to fight cancer. And I'm going to spend a little time talking about who I am. I'll spend most of the time talking about cancer, how we treat cancer, and about a very new, exciting area of cancer research called immunotherapy. Just a little bit about myself. I became interested in science when I was about 9 years old. And my father, who was a physician, used to take me on rounds to visit his patients on the weekends. And he would give me a white lab coat, and he'd give me a pad of paper, and he'd tell the patients that I was one of the doctors. And I remember being so scared because I thought they would really think I was a doctor, and they would ask me really hard questions. But it was wonderful seeing how my father used science to help patients feel better. To my dad, every patient that he encountered was a medical mystery that was waiting to be solved. And it was that medical mystery and the excitement of solving problems, but actually solving problems and helping patients that really hooked me on science. I went to MIT, where I did a bachelor's degree in biology. Because I liked both medicine and I liked science, I did an MD, Ph.D. And then I went and studied pathology at the National Cancer Institute, which is about 30 minutes from here. Pathology is one of the medicine specialties where you use tissues to try to understand what is the disease that a patient has. One small anecdote that I'd like to give, because I think it helps frame, maybe give some advice to people there. When I was a freshman at MIT in the 1980s, I was trying to decide what science I was going to major in. And one of my friends, who was a computer scientist, took me into the basement of this building. There was a huge wall of computers, because in those days you needed very big computers. And he said, look, I want to show you something that's very new. You can sit down at this computer screen, you can type a message and press enter, and the message can be sent across the country. As late 1980s, and I remember looking at him thinking, I see no practical value in this. I don't see how anyone could make a living sitting behind a computer doing anything. And I just sadly shook my head and said, it's good for you, I'm going to stick with biology. My friend did very well, don't worry about him, but I'm very happy that I chose biology, and I think you'll start to see why it was so exciting. I work at a company called MedImmune that I'll introduce you to in a second, and at MedImmune I'm the head of oncology, which is the study of cancer and how to treat patients with cancer. And in a typical day or week, what we do is we try to discover new medicines to treat patients with cancer. We try to predict where cancer treatment is going to be in the future so we can focus our research appropriately. And we work with other scientists and doctors and even students around the world who are also trying to share their excitement and in finding cures for patients with cancer. Now, you're familiar, there are two types of medicines, and everyone here is familiar with the first type, which are shown on the right-hand side, depending on the screen, which are pills and tablets, and those are made from chemicals in factories. There's a new type of medicine that you may not be as familiar with, and these are called biologics. These are made from living cells, and they're proteins. And because they're proteins, you can't take them in a pill form because your stomach is designed to digest proteins. When you eat a steak, your stomach's designed to digest them. So when we administer or give these biologics to patients, we have to give it as an infusion directly into their bloodstream. I work at MedImmune, which is the global biologics research and development arm of a larger international company called AstraZeneca. MedImmune employs over 2,500 people in the US and in the UK, in Northern California, in Cambridge, UK, and in Gaithersburg, which is about 30 minutes from where we are today. We have about 120 different biologics in all different stages of development for a variety of different diseases. And about 40 of these are actually being studied in patients as we speak. And the types of diseases we focus on are diseases with what we consider high unmet need, which are diseases for which patients desperately need new therapies. And this includes cancer, which is the study of oncology, respiratory and inflammation, such as diseases like asthma, cardiovascular and metabolic, such as diseases like diabetes, infections, such as influenza, and neuroscience, such as diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. I'm now going to switch to talk about cancer. Every day, millions of cells in your body are dividing, but this division is under very strict, careful control. In fact, if you have a single damaged cell, your body has such strict control that that single cell, that damaged cell will die, a process called apoptosis. Cancer is uncontrolled cell division, which is one of these damaged cells has lost control and continues to divide. This cell can form a mass, which is called a tumor. And this tumor can be detected by X-rays or CAT scan. And if it grows large enough, it can also be felt by the patient even. When these cells spread throughout the body, this is called metastasis. And it is usually the spread throughout the body that causes the patient to have a lot of symptoms. And unfortunately, if it's not treated, it can kill the patient. There are lots of different causes of cancer, and here's what we call a pie diagram to try and highlight what are some of the major causes of cancer. One of the most important here is smoking, and I want to spend a second talking about it because if you learn nothing else from this weekend, please take away never to start smoking. It is highly addictive and is one of the major causes of cancer. Other causes of cancer include hereditary factors. Some cancers run in families. Grandparents get it, parents and children. And sometimes you can inherit a predisposition to getting the cancer, meaning that you're not definitely going to get it, but you're at a higher risk of getting it. Some infections can cause cancer. Not infections like cold or a skin infection, but rare infections, such as a virus called hepatitis can cause cancer. And there are some other causes, such as from the sun, radiation from the sun can cause skin cancer, and even some health practices can contribute to causing cancer. Cancer can affect any part of your body. In men, common sites of cancer include lung, colorectum, and prostate. And in women, common sites include breast cancer, colorectum, and also lung cancer. And lung cancer, the most common cause of the lung cancer is smoking. Now, fortunately, for some of these cancers, we do have ways to screen. And I'm sure you've heard parents or grandparents talk about mammography, which is screening for breast cancer, and colonoscopy, which is screening for colon cancer. And it's very important because we can detect the cancer when it's at a very small stage and it can be removed. Unfortunately, not all cancers can be screened for. And I think this is an area where some of you may potentially, in this room, one of you may help identify new ways to screen for early cancer, because it's always better to find an early cancer than it is to try and treat a cancer that's spread. This is a very stark slide, and I'm going to spend a second on it to highlight some points. Cancer is an epidemic. 14 million people around the world in a given year will be diagnosed with cancer. And around the world, over 8 million people will die from cancer in a year. And this translates to one person dying every 4 seconds from cancer. In fact, during the 30 minutes that we're here today, this 30 minutes from 10 to 10:30, I've calculated over 400 people somewhere around the world will die in this next 30 minutes from cancer. The risk of cancer is quite dramatic. In an average lifespan, 1 out of every 2 men and 1 out of every 3 women has a risk of developing cancer. Now, fortunately, most of these cancers will not spread. Most of them will be small. Most of them will be caught early. The vast majority will, in fact. It's the ones that metastasize and spread that will cause problems. But you can see that there is a risk for everyone in the room if you live a long life. But once again, this risk is not for developing cancers that will spread. It's just for developing any type of uncontrolled cell growth. The risk of dying from cancer is expected to double in the next 15 years. And this is a very stark statistic. And it's a reason why, once again, I appeal to those in the room who are interested in biology and science to focus your efforts on trying to identify the causes of cancer, how to screen for cancer, and also new medicines to treat cancer. I'll now pivot and talk about how cancer is treated and what the future is. Historically, we've had three ways of treating cancer. First, there is surgery. If the cancer is confined, a surgeon can go in, operate, and try to remove the cancer as much as possible, as much as he or she can visually see. If the cancer, for example, is in a space that is not very amenable to surgery, such as a very delicate part of the brain, we can use radiation, which is X-rays, to try and kill the cancer cells. And if the cancer has metastasized, we can try use chemotherapy to poison the cancer cells. Unfortunately, the chemotherapies tend not to be very specific for cancer cells, and they can also damage normal cells. And this leads to the side effects. And it is these side effects that can limit the duration and the tolerability of the chemotherapy. Recently, there's been excitement about a new area of cancer research. And this has been both in the newspapers as well as at medical conferences. And it's called immunotherapy. And there are 4 reasons why we're so excited about immunotherapy. And we extrapolate these from our understanding of vaccines for many childhood and adult diseases, infectious diseases. The immune system is very powerful. It can attack the cancer cell no matter where it resides in the body. It can it can scan the entire body to try find out where even single cancer cells reside. Second, the immune system is very specific. It can differentiate cancer cells from normal cells and specifically kill the abnormal cells. Third, the immune system has memory, and this leads to the potential for long-term durable control. Very much like when many of you, or when I was a child, people got chickenpox. Nowadays, you get a vaccine. But once you've been exposed to chickenpox, your immune system has memory for the chickenpox, and you can't, and will kill the chickenpox if you come into contact with it again. And finally, there is the exciting potential that immunotherapy can be applied to almost any cancer. And these 4 reasons are why there is so much excitement and focus on immunotherapy for cancer. The history of immunotherapy for disease actually goes back to the late 1700s. And one of the early pioneers was a British physician named Edward Jenner. And Edward Jenner made an interesting observation. All science starts with interesting observations. And his observation was that women who were called milkmaids, those were the ones who used to milk the cows in those days, milkmaids who had open sores on their hand and milked cows who had a cow disease called cowpox were less likely to develop a very terrible infectious disease called smallpox. And he hypothesized, that's number 2, to hypothesize something. He hypothesized that the women would get infected with the cowpox from the cows, and something in their body, which we now know is the immune system, would generate a response so that if they were exposed to smallpox, which is very similar to cowpox, that the immune system, which he didn't know it was the immune system, but that something in the body would recognize the smallpox and kill it. And so he did the next step, which is he tested it. He tested it in patients, and sure enough, cowpox prevented smallpox. This is probably one of the greatest advances that we had because he was able to prevent a lot of people from contracting what was a terribly fatal disease called smallpox. About 100 years later, American scientist William Coley was the first to pioneer immunotherapy for disease, for cancer. And I'll show you what he did in a second. In the 1980s was our first real introduction of modern immunotherapy as we know it. And today, immunotherapy is considered one of the standards of care for a number of very terrible cancers. And here is a picture of one of Dr. Coley's toxins. It's actually a very interesting story. Dr. Coley made an observation. He observed a single patient who had a cancer of the head and neck who was sent home to die because there was no treatment in the late 1800s, early 1900s. This patient who went home to die didn't die. And so Dr. Coley wondered why. And it turned out he got an infection in his skin, right where his cancer was, and something happened and he recovered. So Dr. Coley hypothesized that maybe injecting bacteria into cancer could lead to that same effect. Nowadays, we know that what was happening is the injected bacteria was stimulating an immune response that would come in and kill the tumor, as well as kill the bacteria. Dr. Coley treated about 900 patients with his medicine, which was called Coley's Toxins. Now, you can imagine this. If you're a cancer patient in the early 1900s and some doctor shows up and says, I want to inject live bacteria into you, probably doesn't sound very enticing. So he actually tried to purify the active components from the live bacteria, so he wasn't injecting real live bacteria. And that's why it's called Coley's Toxins. Originally, it was Coley's bacteria. Unfortunately, Dr. Coley did not keep very good medical records. This is a very important part of the scientific method. You have to keep good records, because when others tried to repeat what he did, they were unable to repeat it. And so although he had good success, other people couldn't repeat it, and it fell out of favor. In a second, I'm going to show you a video. We're not going to start it yet, but I'll show it to you. This is an actual cancer cell shown in green, 2 cancer cells, an actual immune cell shown in the dark gray blob, and 2 normal cells. And I'm going to walk you through this video. This is an actual video of real cancer cells, real immune system, and real normal cells in a test tube from Dr. Cooper. So if we can play the video now, what you'll see is the immune cell, which is the dark gray object, is searching around. It finds a cancer cell, the green cell, and kills it. It turns it red and shrinks it. It then will find a normal cell, but it will realize this normal cell is good and will not kill it, and it will go search for another cancer cell. Unfortunately, this cancer cell that it's trying to attack now is not killed, because this cancer cell's erected a cloak of invisibility to protect it from the immune system. And one of the goals of immunotherapy is to try and remove these cloaks of invisibility so that the immune system can kill all of the cancer cells. The immune system is incredibly complex, and that's highlighted on this slide here. I don't expect you to understand what all the cells are. It's just really meant to represent how complex the immune system is. This is good and bad. The good part is that there are lots of targets for us to intervene to try and activate the immune system. The bad part is it is so complex, we don't really have a good understanding yet of what are the right cells to activate. We currently believe that activating multiple different cells at the same time is going to give the greatest benefit, and that's what's called combinations. And therefore, there are a number of groups and companies and scientists trying to find what are the right combinations for the right cancer. For your information, the immune cell you were looking at in the video is a CTL, which is a cytotoxic T lymphocyte, shown there right under number 5. These are the soldiers, the assassins of the immune system that are able to find out the abnormal cells and kill them. Here is the promise of immunotherapy. On the left-hand side is Dr. Steven Rosenberg, who is one of the pioneers of modern-day immunotherapy. And in the mid-1980s, he was trying to identify what is the best immunotherapy to treat a skin cancer called melanoma. And he was visited by the lady standing next to him, who had metastatic skin cancer called melanoma, which at the time was universally fatal. And it's a terrible disease because it usually strikes people when they're 40s and 50s, very young in their life. Usually they have young children. He administered his form of immunotherapy to her in 1984, and she had a dramatic response. In fact, the response was so remarkable, she, 30 years later, in 2014, on the right-hand side, revisited them. They both had aged gracefully, but she was still alive. And this really is the promise of immunotherapy, which is activating the immune system to then target and kill the tumor, inducing long-term memory so that even if the immune system initially doesn't kill all the cancer, it will be educated and remember the cancer, and if the cancer starts to grow, it can find that cancer and kill it. So what we have talked about today are 3 things. 1, cancer is a very deadly disease. It can affect any part of your body. There is a rising incidence or frequency of cancer-related deaths over the next 15 years. There's a lot of work for someone, and I hope many of you in the audience today, to try and help solve this incredibly terrible problem of cancer. One of the most exciting new areas of research is immunotherapy, which is intended to activate and educate the immune system to kill the cancer. We still have a lot of work ahead of us, but for a number of diseases now, we already have active immunotherapies to treat those cancers. And there are probably I would say there are immune therapy clinical trials. There are ongoing active trials to try and determine whether immune therapy works for almost all cancers now. So with that, I'm going to end because I wanted to leave time for some of the great questions and answers. And we're happy to take any questions or take any answers.
Hi. Is it? Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so how exactly do you activate the immune system to be aware of these cells and remember them? Is that through the use of the biologics?
Yes, right. So everything is based on an understanding of the science. And one of the most fundamental discoveries that was made about 20 years ago. See, when William Coley did it 100 years ago, he really didn't know what he was doing. So he would just try to broadly activate the entire immune system with the bacteria. What we are doing now is trying to be very targeted and specific. And one of the most fundamental discoveries made about 20 years ago is that there are key proteins on the surface of the immune system that prevent the immune system from being fully activated. And so with biologics, we're able to block those proteins and unleash the power of the immune system. And there are dozens of different proteins that we can go after.
Okay, so how do you get or gather the biologics?
We first have to identify the target that we want to make the biologic for, and then we develop a biologic that's specific for that target. And then we make that biologic in cells, and then we purify it and administer it to patients.
Okay, so you create it.
Yes, we create the biologics.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
First, do you do any work with pediatric cancer?
Yes, pediatric cancer is one of the cancers that many people are studying immunotherapy. And in fact, one of the most amazing examples recently is a technology called CAR-T, which is and that has been used in pediatric leukemias. So there is ongoing work in pediatric cancers.
Okay, given how few drugs have been developed since the 1970s, do you have an opinion on why it gets so much less funding, research, and attention rather than like the adult cancers?
Yeah, sure. Pediatric cancers actually has been a success story. I know that there have been less drugs developed specifically for pediatric cancers, but pediatric cancers and pediatric oncologists have grouped together to try and experiment and find different cocktails. And there actually has been a tremendous increase in the survival for pediatric cancers. I would say one of the reasons is that adult cancers are just so much more frequent. There are so many more adult cancers than pediatric. But there is definitely active research ongoing. And actually, for every drug we develop now for adult cancers, we have to develop it for pediatric cancers too. That's actually one of the mandates that we have.
Thank you.
Yes.
How does a child get cancer?
That's a very good question. Most of adult cancers are thought to be related to two things. One is people have predispositions or likelihoods or susceptibilities. And second is they get exposure to something in the environment, whether it's smoking, sunlight, or a virus. Children, obviously, very young children don't have that exposure because they're very young and they haven't had time. What we think now is that children who get cancer have genetic changes in their DNA from when they were born that lead to a damaged cell being formed even without the environment affecting it. And so many of the cancers that children have, it's because they have an abnormality in one of their genes.
Okay, thank you.
Part of their DNA. That's a very good question. Childhood cancers are very rare, I should add.
You did say twice while you were talking that the amount of cancer deaths are going to increase in the next 15 years. Why?
I think that probably one of the most common reasons are the environmental causes, such as smoking. Smoking is still a very big problem in the US. We've cut back on smoking, but I was talking around the world, and in developing countries around the world, there are a lot more smokers. So that's one example of why cancers are increasing. There are other reasons, but that's one reason.
Another question is, you mentioned earlier as well that there are proteins that block the immune system from being fully activated. Why are those in place?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Cancer is derived from normal cells. And normal cells have developed ways to prevent the immune system from killing it. Otherwise, our immune system would attack our normal body. So because cancers are derived from normal cells, they're able to hijack the same mechanisms that our normal cells use to prevent the immune system from killing it. Viruses and bacteria don't have that luxury. And that's why it's much easier for our immune system to kill foreign invaders like bacteria and virus. But cancer cells are able to use that same machinery that normal cells use.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for your question. These great questions.
Good morning. You talked about the cloak of invisibility.
Yes.
Does that mean that the cancer cell somehow has a receptor site that it blocks or it changes? How?
Yes. So if the immune system was able to work very well, it should kill all cancers, and no one ever should get cancer, in theory. But what happens is, as I mentioned, the cancer cell has ways to try and protect itself from the immune system, and one of them is by producing proteins on its surface that trick the immune system into thinking that it's a normal cell. And so it looks invisible to the immune system.
And what do you do to prevent that?
So
what can you do?
Right, this comes to science. We have to understand scientifically what is causing that cloak, what is the reason behind that cloak. And then if we can understand the reason, we can then try to target it to remove that cloak. But it's all about scientifically understanding what causes the cloak.
Thank you.
I think that's all the...
Can we take one more question?
Okay, sure.
They're so good.
Hi, so you mentioned about chicken pox, smallpox, and cowpox, but what does the pox part of that name actually mean?
Yeah, the pox actually comes from, historically, pox is, people say a pox on you, which a pox is kind of like a skin boil. It was one of the symptoms or manifestations of a viral infection. Chicken pox, you get these little red bumps on you. Smallpox, you would get different types of bumps. So the pox really represents the infection of the virus.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I think that's all the time we have right now for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Give Dr. Berman a round of applause.
Actually, the applause should go for the kids in the audience. So
Great
thank you very
questions.
much.